his not sharp anymore. My son's voice, plain as day, coming through the hallway vent. We'll move her to Oakhill in March. List the house by Easter. Oakhill, the place with linoleum floors and visiting hours. By summer, Lindsay added. We'll have the down payment for the lake lot. They clinked glasses. To my erasure. The pie in my oven had started to burn. So had everything else. Before I tell you how I turned their plan into the biggest mistake of their lives, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe if you believe no one deserves to be thrown away by their own children. I didn't gasp. Didn't cry. I just stood there in the kitchen, butter on my palms, salt in my throat. They thought I was too old to hear, too gentle to understand, too tired to stop them. But they forgot whose name was on the deed, whose hands paid off the mortgage, whose sweat still lived in the baseboards. I opened the drawer under the stove, same place Carl and I kept the important stuff, deed, tax statements, our updated will. His flannel still hung near the back door. I held it close, still smelled like sawdust and peppermint. I'd spent 48 Thanksgivings in this kitchen, roasting, serving, smiling. This time, I would be the one carving something different, the future. By the time Craig hugged me goodbye and offered to help me manage things, I had already found 3 agents. Cash buyers, no contingencies, out in 10 days. They called me sweet, said, "You've done enough." They had no idea just how much I'd done. The house wasn't too much for me. They were. I wiped the counter, set out their pie to cool, and began drafting the note I'd leave on the door. This house isn't yours to plan around. Love, Mom. Would you call it revenge? Or just a mother finally reclaiming her space? Craig used to call it the cookie house. Back when his legs were short and his questions endless. The smell of cinnamon always meant he was home. Carl had built the shelves in the living room during one icy February. He didn't say much while he worked, just measured twice, cut once, and whistled through his teeth when something fit perfectly. That sound still echoes in my memory. So does the way Craig used to sit cross-legged on the rug, watching his father with the wide-eyed reverence only little boys have. "Daddy's building us a castle," he once whispered, sticky with jam, holding a wooden block like treasure. Carl turned and winked at me. "We're building something all right. That bookshelf still stands. The varnish has dulled, but every groove holds more than just stories. It holds Saturdays we never got back, lunches on the floor, bedtime read alouds, and the time Craig scraped his elbow chasing the dog through the hall. I can still see Carl setting down his hammer, kneeling beside Craig, bandaging that scrape with hands that could lift beams, but wiped tears like feathers. Those walls saw a family once. A real one. Craig would sit beside me on the piano bench, his fingers too small to reach a full octave. He played with his whole body, swinging side to side, laughing every time he missed a note. "I'm making jazz, Mama," he'd say. I kept the sheet music he doodled on in crayon, still tucked inside the bench, still smells faintly of paper and lemon oil. Now, when I walk through the house, the silence presses louder than any chord. The floors creak the same, but the weight on them is mine alone. Even the kitchen table, scarred from 1,000 family dinners, feels too clean, too empty. Carl's flannel still hangs by the door, not because I forgot it was there, but because I need it to be. Some days, I swear it shifts slightly on the hook, as if it knows I'm passing. This was never just a house. It was a life built board by board, song by song, moment by moment. And somewhere along the line, they stopped seeing it that way. The first time Craig brought Lindsay over, she smiled too wide and glanced around like she was appraising a listing. "This place has character," she said, her voice floating somewhere between compliment and critique. She never asked how long Carl and I had lived here, never noticed the piano in the corner or the photos on the mantel. Craig in his scout uniform, Carl squinting into the sun with sawdust on his collar. She brought store-bought lemon bars that tasted like soap. Craig said nothing when I laid out the good china. He used to brag about my pecan pie to anyone who'd listen. Now he just checked his phone and nodded when Lindsay mentioned how hard it must be to maintain all this. She ran a finger across the hallway trim, like she was looking for dust or fault. I laughed it off at the time, but something pulled in my chest that night when they left early to beat the storm that never came. The next time they visited, Craig sat at the table scrolling through listings. Lindsay leaned over his shoulder, pointing at a place near some lake I'd never heard of. It's got enough room for the boys, and maybe even a guest space for holidays. She didn't say, for you, but the silence was loud enough. I brought out coffee. No one touched it. I used to know Craig's laugh from 3 rooms away. Now I could barely read the shape of his face. His shoulders, once boyishly sloped, were squared by something else now. A pressure maybe. Or pride. I asked him if he still remembered the Christmas. He'd built a manger from cardboard for the front porch. He blinked at me, then turned back to Zillow. They didn't mean to be cruel. That's what I told myself for months. Maybe they were just busy, maybe they thought I wanted space. But there's a kind of distance that grows slowly. Quietly. One day your phone stops ringing. The next, your voice doesn't carry the same weight. Then comes the moment you realize you've become an obligation. And no one says it. But they're all waiting for you to hand over the keys. The dining table seats 6. I only ever set one place now. Meatloaf again. 2 slices dry at the edges. No one to pass the rolls to. No one asking for seconds. I eat in silence. The only sound the ticking of the wall clock Carl fixed 20 years ago. It's running fast now. I let it. The kitchen light buzzes faintly overhead. I should replace the bulb, but there's always next week. Sometimes I still reach for the second fork. Habit, I guess. Or hope. When Craig was 5, he used to tug on my skirt at bedtime. I was afraid of the hallway shadows. I can't sleep unless you're right here. He'd whisper, his breath warm against my palm. I'd stay until his chest rose slow and even, then tiptoe out in the dark. That boy, he used to need me. Now, I'm just the hallway he avoids. I used to be his safe place. They came by for lunch on a Sunday. No warning. Just a knock and Lindsay's voice through the door. Hope we're not catching you off guard. I wasn't ready, but I smiled anyway. I reheated soup and thawed the last 2 biscuits from Christmas. Craig sat at the table, phone face down, eyes scanning the kitchen. Smells like thyme in here, he said. No warmth, just fact. Lindsay leaned over the sink, looking out at Carl's old shed. He really built that himself. I nodded. He could do anything with his hands. Craig stirred his soup twice and didn't take a sip. Mama, have you ever thought about what's next? His tone was soft, rehearsed. Like he was trying to sell a car I didn't want. What do you mean? What's next? I already knew. You know, this place is a lot to keep up with. Lindsay jumped in, smiling too sweet. And winters are hard out here. You could slip, no one would know. I looked down at my plate. The biscuit had gone cold. So had the room. I get by fine. We know, Mama, we care, Craig said. But we worry? You're 74, alone, and this house, it's old. I stared at the tablecloth. Faded roses from our first anniversary set. Carl spilled coffee on it the morning Craig took his first steps. I never could get the stain out. You're saying I can't handle it anymore. I didn't raise my voice. I just said it aloud, to test how it tasted. Lindsay reached for her glass. No one's saying that. It's just being proactive. Craig exhaled. It's not about control. It's about love. Love, I thought. Strange how it feels like strategy. There was once a time Craig ran to me crying when his science fair volcano exploded early. He said I was the only one who made things feel okay. Now he offered exit strategies. Now he looked at me like liability on a long to-do list. I wasn't imagining it. The shift in his shoulders, the tone of his concern, the way he didn't touch the soup I made with my hands. Lindsay's nails tapped the glass. I have a brochure for a place near the lake. Just a thought. They always started with just a thought. Then came signatures. I stood to clear the table. Craig rose too. Don't overreact, Mama. We're just looking out for you. I turned on the sink. The water hissed between us. Steam curled upward. I watched it vanish. Of course, I said. You always do. After they left, the house went quiet again. Not peaceful quiet. Just hollow. I stood at the kitchen sink long after the water stopped running. The bowls were clean. The table wiped. But something sticky still clung to the air. Craig had kissed my cheek before heading out. Said the words gently, like he thought they'd land soft. You've had a good run, Mom. A good run. Like I was a car, or a kitchen appliance past warranty. I pulled out the dish towel and dried my hands slowly, like the movement could erase what he'd said. But it stayed, stuck behind my ribs. I sat in Carl's chair by the window, the one he always used when he read the newspaper, legs crossed, pen in hand for the crossword. Outside, the oak trees were shedding early. Brown leaves fluttered like tired confetti. One landed on the porch step and didn't move. From this chair, I could still see the hallway, where Craig used to run barefoot in his Superman pajamas. He'd skid on purpose just to make me laugh. Faster than a speeding bullet. Mama, I remember scooping him up when he fell, his arms tight around my neck, his tears warm against my collarbone. He used to think I could fix anything. Now he thought I was something broken. Maybe it started when Carl died. The center of the house shifted that year. Rooms that once hummed with purpose turned dim. The piano stayed closed. Craig called more often at first, dropped off groceries, checked the thermostat. But then life filled in for him. New job, new wife, new family. And I became the check and call. The background task. The next thing to handle. I traced the edge of the armrest. The wood worn smooth from years of elbows and time. Carl always said this chair would outlive us both. On the wall across from me hung our wedding photo. Black and white, slightly tilted in the frame. Carl in a suit that never fit quite right. Me in lace gloves and borrowed pearls. He was looking straight at the camera. Head high, shoulders back, eyes steady. The same eyes Craig inherited. Except now, Craig rarely looked at me that way. I leaned forward, rested my elbows on my knees, and met Carl's gaze across the room. And for one long second, I swear it looked like he was waiting for me to say something. The envelope came on a Thursday. No return address, just Craig's handwriting. Neat, tight, a little too careful. Inside was a single-page letter and a printed form clipped to the corner. Mama, this is just a simple power of attorney form. It lets me help you with things. Bills, bank stuff, whatever you need. You don't have to use it. It's just in case something ever happens. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd nursed him at when he had the flu in 2nd grade. The same spot where he did his spelling homework with a furrowed brow. My fingers brushed the edge of the paper. The air felt colder somehow, even though the heat was running. I reread his words, looking for something he hadn't written. It's just in case. But what if just in case was already here? The form was standard. I knew that much. My friend Alice signed something similar when her arthritis made it hard to write checks. But Alice didn't have a son like Craig. Something told me to wait. To check, I pulled the tin lockbox from the linen closet, still where Carl kept it. Inside bank books, old statements, a laminated copy of our will, and one yellow legal pad filled with Carl's blocky handwriting. He'd logged every major expense for 20 years. My hands didn't shake. But I moved slowly, deliberately. I pulled the most recent bank statement. It had Craig's name printed at the bottom, next to a note. Online access granted to authorized family. Funny, I didn't remember authorizing anything. I traced the line item dated 2 weeks ago. Withdrawal $2,000. Label home improvement advance. It wasn't mine. Nothing had been repaired. The windows still whined in the wind. The porch still leaned slightly to the right. Carl would have fixed them by now. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with clarity. Craig had always known how to sound reasonable. He'd talked himself out of a speeding ticket at 17, talked his way into a better dorm in college, talked me into signing that first loan when he was between jobs, and I'd said yes. Because he was my son. Because I wanted to believe I was helping. But now I didn't feel like I was helping. I felt like I was handing over the keys, one signature at a time. I set the pen beside the form, uncapped, ready. Then I stood and walked away. I went back to the lockbox that night. Carl always said, "Paper remembers what people forget." I pulled the last 12 months of statements. Spread them out across the table, one by one. The numbers lined up like whispers I hadn't wanted to hear. 1,000 here. 700 there. Loan to Craig temp work gap. Auto insurance, just this once. Deposit for boys' soccer trip. The handwriting was mine. The memory was foggier. Each note felt smaller in the moment. Each request wrapped in that same voice Craig used when he was 6, asking for one more cookie, one more bedtime story. And I always said yes. Because I wanted to believe saying yes still mattered. That I wasn't just giving money. I was giving connection. But the balance said otherwise. Carl would have noticed sooner. He was good with numbers. Better with silence. He could sit beside you and read what you weren't saying. I wished I'd listened more when he showed me how to balance the books. Back then, I thought, what's the hurry? We had time. Now time was what I'd traded for comfort. I opened the last envelope in the stack. Inside was a revised copy of our joint will, the one Craig had offered to update after Carl passed. I'd trusted him. Carl's name was crossed out. Mine sat alone at the top. And beneath it, typed clean and centered, was a clause I didn't recognize. Upon the passing or incapacitation of the primary party, all assets to be managed by designated adult child for efficiency of estate. See efficient. That word again. The same word Lindsay used when she talked about downsizing. The same tone Craig used when he said, "It's just easier if I handle things for you now." I closed the folder. My hands didn't shake, but they felt older than they had in weeks. I made tea. Carl's chip mug with the faded treble clef still hung on the rack. Steam rose quietly as I poured. Then I sat, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and began writing. Not to Craig, not to the bank, but to myself. A list. Everything I still owned. Everything I still remembered. Everything that would not be decided without me. Then came the new will, just a draft. Handwritten, scratchy, plain. But mine. Carl once told me, "Someday you'll be the only one left holding the pen. Write like it matters." So I did. And for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming of being erased. The phone didn't ring that week. Not once. No follow-up from Craig. No, "Did you get the papers?" No, "Just checking in." I told myself he was busy. Meetings, schedules, family. But the silence had a shape now. Thick around the edges. Sharp in the middle. Even the mail came thinner. Coupons. A credit card offer. Nothing with a real name on it. I spent most days in the kitchen. Cleaning things that didn't need cleaning. Wiping down cabinets that had already been wiped. Folding dish towels twice. B.T. Patterson from 2 doors down waved at me that morning. Her smile was thinner than usual. She tilted her head slightly, like people do when they're about to say something awkward, but decide to let it hang. "Morning," she called. "Morning," I answered. She waited, then turned back to watering her petunias. I used to be the woman folks asked to lead the bake sale. Now I was the one they asked about in whispers. Is she okay? Is someone helping her? Has she started forgetting things? I remembered everything, especially who didn't come anymore. The back door creaked around 3. I turned, startled. "Hi," a small voice said. It was Jonah, Lindsay's boy from her first marriage. 12. Thin, always with a backpack too big for his frame. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, shoes muddy. Eyes soft. "I knocked," he said. I smiled. I must not have heard. "Come in, honey." He sat at the edge of the couch, backpack still on, like he wasn't sure if he was staying. I poured him lemonade. He didn't ask. Just drank slowly, both hands wrapped around the glass like it might disappear. "They don't like when I come here," he said suddenly. I paused. "They? Craig? Lindsay? They think you're old?" I waited. "Am I?" He looked up. "You're the only one who listens." That landed deeper than he knew. I sat beside him, knees aching slightly. We listened to the clock tick for a while. "You still play piano?" he asked. "Not much." "You should." That was all. Then he stood, zipped his jacket, left the empty glass by the sink. As he walked out, he turned back once. "I'll come again. You don't talk over me." The door clicked softly behind him, and for the first time all week, the silence in the house didn't feel like a threat. It felt like something shared. Jonah started coming every Tuesday, then Thursday. Sometimes just for 10 minutes, sometimes long enough to lose track of time. He'd bring me little things: a packet of jelly beans, a comic book he thought I'd like, a note scribbled in pencil. "Do you still have that old Scrabble set?" We never talked about his mother, or Craig, or why the kitchen felt warmer when he was in it. One afternoon, I made him grilled cheese. He asked if I could teach him piano. "I don't want lessons," he clarified. "I just want to know what the keys feel like." We sat together on the old bench. His fingers hovered above middle C. "Just press it," I said. "No right or wrong yet." He smiled, small but real, and let the note ring. It hung in the room like breath held too long, and something inside me loosened, a string pulled tight for years. We played like that for a week, one note at a time, no rules, no plans, until the call came. It was Friday, late, the kind of late Craig only called during emergencies. "Mama." His voice clipped, sharp. "I heard you've been having Jonah over." I paused. "He stops by. We talk. That's all." "You think it's your place to parent someone else's kid now?" He didn't wait for an answer. "He has a mother. He has me. He doesn't need you muddying things. He needs someone to listen." Craig exhaled hard. "He's not your responsibility." There it was. Flat. Final. Like a door slammed shut. I didn't reply. Not right away. In the pause, I could hear Jonah's laughter from 2 days ago. The way he asked if soup always tasted better in chipped bowls. "He comes because he wants to. I don't invite him." "That's not the point." Craig's voice dropped into something colder. "You make things messy. You always have." My hand clenched the phone, knuckles white, jaw tight. "I taught you how to tie your shoes," I whispered. "I held your head when you had strep at 4. That wasn't messy. That was motherhood." He didn't respond. Just hung up. The screen blinked back to black. I stood in the dark kitchen. The refrigerator hummed low. Outside, the porch light flickered once. Jonah didn't come that week. Or the next. No knock. No jelly beans. No music. I set out 2 mugs anyway. Poured one. Let it sit cold. He wasn't mine. But somehow, losing him felt familiar. Like being uninvited from a life you helped build. And still being blamed for standing too close to the door. The invitation came through text. From Craig. No emoji. No punctuation. Just, "Jonah's birthday this Saturday, 2 p.m. You can come if you want." I baked a lemon cake from scratch. The kind Jonah liked. Light frosting, no sprinkles. Wrapped it in foil, tied it with twine. I wore my dark green sweater. The one Carl said made my eyes look calm. When I arrived, the yard was already full. Lawn chairs, folding tables, soda cans half tipped in the grass, kids chasing balloons that kept slipping free. Lindsay spotted me first. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you came." I nodded, held out the cake. "Thought Jonah might like this." She took it without thanks. Turned to someone else before I'd finished speaking. I found a spot near the fence, far enough not to be in the way, close enough to watch. Jonah opened presents on a blanket. Craig stood beside him, camera out, smile fixed. When Jonah opened a small box and grinned, I saw it. Just for a second, he looked up, searched the crowd, found me, smiled wider. Lindsay noticed too. She leaned toward Craig, whispered something, then walked toward me, heels sinking into the lawn. "Marjorie," she said, too loudly. People turned. Conversations dipped. "You really think anyone needs you here?" Her voice was sweet enough to poison. My throat closed. I felt my ears burn. Someone chuckled, awkward, unsure. Craig didn't move, didn't say a word. I looked at Jonah. He was holding the cake plate, not eating, just watching. I wanted to say something. anything. But my tongue felt full of cotton. I placed the envelope I'd brought on the gift table. A simple card, no money. Just words. You matter more than they know. Keep playing. Then I turned. Walked through grass that no longer felt like grass. Every step heavier than the last. I didn't look back. Except once. Jonah was still watching me. Eyes wide. Hands clenched at his sides. The only face in that party that looked unsure whether I should have left at all. The house was too quiet when I got back. I kicked off my shoes, set my purse down, and stood in the hallway longer than I meant to. No one was coming behind me. No one to ask if I was all right. I didn't cry. Didn't even sigh. Just moved slowly toward the living room where the birthday card still sat. One spare copy in case I misspelled something. I tore it in half. Then folded both pieces again, neat, careful. Like folding away a memory that had gone stiff at the corners. I sat in Carl's chair, where the cushion had long since flattened. It still held his shape more than mine. I thought about the first time I met Lindsay. Craig brought her over on a windy afternoon, introducing her like someone who'd already made a decision. She had on too much perfume and talked about sales like it was war. Still, I'd tried. Made apple crisp from scratch, polished the silver. Wore earrings for the first time in months. She'd barely touched the dessert. Just smiled politely. Asked if I planned to stay in the house, forever. Said it like a joke. I laughed anyway. Later, I found her in the hallway, straightening a photo on the wall. Things bother me, she'd said. She wasn't wrong. Just early, that night Craig kissed my cheek and said, "Thanks for being easy." The easy, like quiet wallpaper. Like furniture no one moves but everyone leans on. I stood up slowly. Walked over to the mantel. The wedding photo. Craig's graduation. The picture from Jonah's first Thanksgiving. All in one long row. Frames rubbed clean weekly. Like that would keep the people inside them still close. My hands moved without thinking. I took down the frame of Craig and Lindsay. The one where I was cropped at the edge. Just my hand holding a cake knife. I stared at it a while. Then laid it flat in the drawer. The wall looked odd without it. Lighter. Like the paint remembered where it had once been hidden. A ghost of a frame. Faded rectangle. Honest. Empty. I stepped out the back door without grabbing a coat. The evening air cut through my sleeves, but I didn't mind. The grass had grown longer than I liked. It used to be Carl's weekend pride. He kept the edges neat, lined the flower beds with smooth river stones we'd collected on road trips. Now, the stones were half sunk. The grass had swallowed them slowly, like everything else we left behind. In the far corner sat two wooden chairs. One leaned slightly. The other stood straighter, but its right arm had split from the summer heat. Carl used to read the paper in that chair, iced tea on the armrest, one sock always slipping down. Craig learned to ride his bike right here. The path still faint in the dirt, a groove time hadn't bothered to erase. I used to sit with him under the maple, count lightning bugs, hold his sticky hands, and promise monsters didn't live in shadows. The chairs had held so many evenings, so many small forgivings. Now they held only air and dust. A gust of wind came suddenly. Not loud, but sure. One of the chairs tipped over, fell flat with a soft, final thud. I didn't move. Didn't bend down. Didn't fix it. I just looked at it, resting in the grass like it belonged there now. Like it was tired of standing upright for people who forgot what it once held. The breeze quieted. A leaf scraped by. And I said, barely above a whisper, more to Carl than to the wind, "I'm not the one who broke it." I went looking for an old warranty. The washing machine had started groaning again, and I remembered Carl filed everything, even receipts for screws, in the bottom drawer of the hall cabinet. The drawer stuck halfway, like always. I gave it a tug, and it came loose with a soft clatter of paper sliding sideways. I knelt. The cold from the tiles sank into my knees. Amid the folders and yellowing envelopes, I found one marked in Carl's writing. BNK, keep for records. It wasn't thick. Just a few pages, folded tight. I opened it slowly. The paper was dry, brittle at the corners. At the top, First Plains Credit Union, Online activity summary. The date made me pause. 3 months ago, well after Carl had passed, well after Craig had taken over, assisting. The one line in particular pulled the air from the room. A vendor. Oakhill Senior Planning Services. At amount Ford 800 Serzif Memo. Housing reservation deposit. M. Lim. My name, typed out neat, like I was luggage. I stared at the paper for a long time. Let the numbers settle into place. Fourth 800. More than my monthly Social Security check. I remembered asking Craig last spring, what was that payment to Oakhill? He had smiled. Soft-tired. Oh, it's just brochure stuff. Nothing's official. Then he'd changed the subject, said the lawn needed fertilizer. But this was a deposit, a reservation, a plan. Without me, my knees creaked as I stood. The envelope still in my hand. The edges now bent where my fingers had curled too tight. I walked to the kitchen, laid the document flat on the table, smoothed it out with my palm. The ink hadn't faded. It shouted. Even in silence. Carl had saved this. He must have printed it before the account was locked down, before Craig changed the passwords and told me not to worry. But Carl always worried. Quietly. Thoroughly. And now I understood why. I looked down at the folder, the handwriting still steady. Still Carl. Then I looked at my hands. Still here, still mine. And this time, I wouldn't file it away. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even lie down. Just sat at the kitchen table, the Oakhill deposit still laid out in front of me like a verdict. The lamp above flickered once, then steadied, same as my breath. Around 3 a.m., I stood up and went back to the hall cabinet. Carl never kept just one copy of anything. I remembered that. He used to say, one for paper, one for fire. The fire copy was always hidden, behind the shelf, taped to the underside with blue painter's tape. I ran my hand underneath the bottom panel, felt the edge, pulled. Another folder, thin and flat. Inside was a packet labeled, Transfer of Financial Authority Lynn Residence. There was a signature page, and there, centered beneath the line, was my name, my full name, in cursive, almost right, but not mine. I stared at it like I was reading a stranger's face, trying to wear my features. The L in Lynn looped wrong, too sharp at the turn. The G in Marjorie didn't dip the way mine always had. Carl used to tease me about that. Said it looked like a fish hook. This G was clean, clinical, like someone scanned it from a birthday card. I felt my pulse in my palms. Steady, loud. Craig had said something weeks ago. Let me take care of the insurance forms. They're just red tape. Red tape. I pressed the paper against the light. No indentation. No pen pressure. Just inkjet flat. Empty. Fake. I thought about how many times he called me forgetful. How often he explained things I never forgot. How easy it is to gaslight someone when the world already expects them to slip. I lowered the contract to the table. Folded it once. Twice. The corners didn't line up, but that felt honest. I whispered to no one. To Carl. To the linoleum. You planned to bury me while I still breathed. I didn't turn on the lights. The house knew where I was going. I moved through it like muscle memory. Hand on the stair rail, bare feet soft against the cool floor. Each step a pulse. I sat in the living room, in Carl's chair, the paper from the drawer still folded in my hand. The window showed only my reflection now, older, tired, but clearer than I'd seen in months. I looked around the room, not with nostalgia, but with inventory. The bookshelf Carl built in '83, still holding up, no sag. The rug I crocheted in the fall Craig started kindergarten, the one he spilled juice on and cried over. Still stained, still here. The lamp with the wobbly shade, the coffee table with the dent from Craig's toy truck, the hairline crack in the molding Carl called character. Everything worn, but nothing broken. Except trust. That had been cracked quietly, systematically, with every soft lie. You're imagining things, Mom. Let me handle that, Mom. Don't worry, Mom, they said. Mum, like punctuation, to soften what followed, to end any question before it was asked. But now I had a question. One they wouldn't like. What if I didn't go quietly? What if I didn't sign? Didn't fold? Didn't disappear? What if I stayed? I looked up at the mantel. Carl's photo sat at the center, tie crooked, grin uneven, eyes calm like he knew something before I did. I touched the frame, thumb resting on the corner. Held it there. "You built this with me," I whispered. The room didn't move. "Now I'll protect it without you." The sun wasn't up yet when I stepped into the backyard barefoot. Dew clung to the grass like breath that hadn't landed. I let it soak through my soles. Cold, honest. The garden was mostly weeds now. Carl used to keep it clean. Said the first 15 minutes of the day should belong to your hands, not your head. I sat on the bench beside the faded bird bath, its basin cracked where ice once split the stone. A robin hopped along the fence, eyed me like I'd interrupted something. I whispered into the chill. "I'm still here." Back inside, I put on the kettle. Carl's mug. Same chip near the handle. On the shelf above the stove sat a small spiral notebook. I'd used it for grocery lists. Prices scratched in pencil, eggs circled twice when they were on sale. I opened a new page, wrote the date in steady print. Then I titled it FIFTY. I didn't plan to show it to anyone. Not yet. But it would exist. That mattered. Page 1 bank accounts, routing numbers, who had access and who didn't. Page 2 titles, house deed location, will status, date of last legal review. Page 3. Passwords, written in code only I would understand. A list of questions Craig would never think to ask because he assumed I no longer remembered. But I remembered every birthday, every loan, every time he said, "Let me handle it." I poured the tea, sat at the kitchen table, watched the steam rise and vanish. Carl once told me, "You're not a folder, Marjorie. Don't let anyone file you away." At the time I'd laughed, said, "Who'd bother filing me?" Now I understood what he meant. It wasn't about being useful. It was about being visible, unarchived, unerased. I flipped to a clean page, wrote ECHETSONLIK, underlined it twice. Then started listing. How to reset the breaker when the porch light flickered. Where I'd hidden the key to the back shed. What the medicine cabinet latch did if you pressed too hard. The small things. The things that make a home a living thing. The things no one ever asks until it's too late. By the time the sun cracked over the neighbor's roof, I'd filled 6 pages. No drama, no panic, just a quiet kind of readiness. A woman who'd been handled long enough. Finally putting both hands back on the file. The clock read 18:03 when I picked up the phone. I stared at the numbers, let them settle, then dialed. The number still lived in my address book, under Carl, legal. It rang twice. Then a man's voice, groggy but clear. "Fisher Law Office." "Hello," I said. "This is Marjorie Lynn. I need to speak to Todd." A pause, shuffling. Then another voice came through, older, firmer, but still carrying that tone Carl used to call. Paper, steady. "Mrs. Lynn," he said. "Well now, it's been a while." "Not long enough," I said, and something in me almost smiled. "I'm assuming this isn't just a friendly call." "No, it's not," I told him. "And not everything, but enough. The unauthorized signature, the Oak Hill deposit." The pattern, he didn't interrupt, didn't soothe, just let the silence work. Then he said, "You free tomorrow?" "Early morning. I want to go over a few things with you in person." "Tomorrow's fine." I looked at the calendar. No plans. No need to cancel anyone else's time. "I'm not doing this to stir trouble," I said. I needed him to hear it. "You're doing this," he replied, "because someone already did." He gave me a list. "Bring the house deed. Your will, if you can find it. Any recent bank statements. And that document you say wasn't signed by you." I wrote it all down on the back of a utility bill. The handwriting looked more like Carl's than mine. After the call, I packed slowly. Folder after folder into the leather tote I hadn't used since Carl's funeral. Zipper stuck for a moment. I worked it loose with a letter opener. The bag creaked when I lifted it. Heavy with proof, I picked out a gray wool cardigan, ironed slacks, polished flats. The kind of clothes people wear when they want to be taken seriously by people who think they're past mattering. I stood in front of the mirror. straightened the collar, fixed a curl behind my ear, lines across my face, clear, deep, like roots, like history. The kind of face that says she's seen more than she ever said. I held the bag against my hip, took one long look, then said softly, to the reflection, to Craig, to Carl, to every room in that house, "No, let's see what a burden can do." The law office sat above a dry cleaner, on a quiet stretch of Maple Avenue. Same brick building Carl once joked looked too humble for legal things. But we trusted Todd Fisher because he spoke slow and read every line twice. The waiting room smelled like old coffee and lemon, scented wipes. A clock ticked too loud, but I wasn't nervous. Todd came out himself, gray at the temples now, but still the same man who held Carl's hand when we updated the will after his first surgery. He didn't ask how I was, just nodded toward the door. "Let's talk." I laid the folders on the desk one by one. Bank statements, signed forms, the forged signature, the deposit to Oak Hill. He took his time, didn't say much, only underlined a few lines, scribbled on a yellow legal pad. When he looked up, his voice was even. "You've got every right to act now, Marjorie. This house is yours. Your name's still on every title. There's no power of attorney, no transfer of rights, and that signature." He held up the paper. "Whoever scanned this forgot one thing. State law requires a witness signature for this type of document. This is void." I let out a breath, didn't even know I'd been holding it. He tapped his pen once, then leaned back. "If you want to sell the house, you can. No one can stop you. Not legally, not morally either, if you ask me." "I'm not asking for permission," I said quietly. "Just clarity." He smiled, sad and proud all at once. "You've got it." That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. One to a realtor Carl once coached in choir. One to the moving company down by the highway. One to the storage unit that still had a space in my name. I didn't call Craig. Didn't leave a note. Didn't owe anyone an explanation for protecting what I'd built. They had planned their freedom under my roof. Now I'd use that roof to build my own. The realtor arrived at 10 sharp. Young, polished, hair neat, voice quick, but her eyes softened when she stepped inside. She took a deep breath in the entryway. "Smells like lemon oil and..." "Is that cedar?" "Carl's shelves," I said. "Still breathe after all these years." She smiled, pulled out her phone, started taking photos. We walked through slowly. Living room first. She admired the crown molding Carl installed in '91, ran her hand along the fireplace mantel I'd sanded myself. "It's rare," she said. "To see things this well, kept." I nodded. Didn't say that I polished those wood grains when I couldn't sleep. That the shine was made from worry and habit. Next was the kitchen. She paused by the bay window. "This is lovely. Natural light's everything." "This is where Craig first saw snow," I said, not meaning to. He stood right there in footy pajamas, asked if the sky was broken. We moved to the hallway. 3 bedrooms. One still had the alphabet wallpaper from Craig's preschool years. The letters were fading, but the glue held. "This would make a great nursery," she said, gesturing toward the smallest room. I didn't answer. Just watched as she opened the closet, not seeing the marks on the inside of the door. A heights measured in pencil, each year, each inch, unpainted, on purpose. The primary bedroom was last. She stepped in quietly, eyes scanning the dresser. "The quilt I'd made the summer Carl got laid off. It's got warmth," she said. "Some houses feel like shells. This feels lived in." "It was," I replied. "No shells here." She looked around once more, then turned to me. "This could sell fast. It's got heart." I smiled. Not bitter, not proud, just clear. "It had mine." She nodded. No questions after that, just respect. I followed her back to the door. The click of her heels softened near the rug. "Ready for photos?" she asked. "Not just yet," I said. "I'd like one more night before I let the light in." That night, I didn't sleep much. Didn't need to. The house was quiet. No creaks, no heater kicking in. Just the hush of a place that had already started letting go. I walked room to room with a small cardboard box. Not to pack, just to gather. Carl's shaving brush, the tiny gold cross I wore the day Craig was born, a Polaroid of me in curlers, laughing with a pie in my lap. These were mine. Not for Craig, not for legacy, just for memory. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer near the stove, the one where we kept loose pens, paper scraps, take-out menace from places long gone. I pulled out a yellow notepad. The first sheet curled at the corner. I wrote without stopping. Dear Craig, you're not evil. You're just tired of me. And I'm tired of pretending that doesn't hurt. I loved you harder than I loved myself. That was my first mistake. But it's not your house. And I'm not your loose end. I signed only, Mom, then folded the paper once and tucked it behind the cookie jar. Not hidden, just not handed. By midnight, I'd turned off the porch light, unplugged the kettle, and zipped the box shut. I walked the hallway one last time, ran my fingers across the door frames, feeling the groove where Craig once carved a smiley face. He thought I never noticed. I never sanded it down. In the living room, I turned off the lamp beside Carl's recliner. Took a deep breath. The kind you take before saying goodbye. Not because you're sad, but because you're free. I stepped outside, locked the front door, and whispered to the dark, "You don't own me anymore." Craig jiggled the key again. It didn't turn. He frowned, pulled it out, blew on it like dust might be the problem, then tried again. Still nothing. Maybe it's jammed, Lindsay said, already scrolling on her phone, looking up locksmiths or excuses. He tried the back door. Same thing. Then the garage keypad. Code rejected. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "I told you we shouldn't have left for this long," she said. Her voice clipped, tense. Craig looked around the porch, searching for clues, then spotted it, a white envelope, neatly taped to the glass, right above the deadbolt. His name in cursive. Hers too, no stamp, no return address. He ripped it down, hands shaking, opened the flap like it might explode. Inside one piece of lined paper, no greeting, no signature, just one sentence in his mother's careful handwriting: "S. This was never yours to sell." Seth, his mouth opened. Closed. Lindsay grabbed the paper from him, her face turned white. Then red. "She sold it," she whispered. "She sold the damn house." Craig paced the porch like a dog trying to find a way back inside. "This is illegal. She can't just lock us out. We live here." "We don't." "Not anymore," Lindsay snapped. "We never signed a lease. Never paid rent. We never had a damn claim." He pulled out his phone, called his mom. Straight to voicemail, tried again. Same thing. He texted as, "Mom, what's going on? Call me." Nothing's authing. He called again. Still nothing. "I'll call an attorney," he said. But his voice sounded thin now, like even he didn't believe it. Lindsay folded the paper and slipped it into her purse. "We need to find a place to stay tonight." Craig looked at the house. The curtains drawn, the porch light off, like it had already forgotten them. "She can't do this," he whispered. But the lock said otherwise. Craig circled the side of the house, his steps crunching over old mulch and broken twigs. The sliding window in the laundry room was cracked open. It just an inch. He pulled it up. It stuck halfway. He pushed harder. The frame groaned. Then, snap, it gave. "Push me up," he told Lindsay. "You're not serious," she said, but she bent down anyway. He climbed through, landed hard on the tile with a grunt. The house felt wrong. Empty air. No hum from the fridge. No faint scent of coffee or old wood polish. Just silence, thick and intentional. "Let me in," Lindsay called from outside. He unlocked the back door. She stepped inside, heels echoing, paused, took it in. The dining table, gone. Sofa, gone. Curtains still there, but drawn tight. Only one thing sat by the front door. A tiny black device with a red light blinking. "What the hell is that?" Craig asked. Lindsay leaned in. "It's a camera." Motion activated. A quiet whir. It tilted slightly, tracking them. She was watching, Craig muttered, waiting. He stormed through the house, checking every room. The closets were empty. No shoes by the door. No coats in the hall. No family photos. Even the magnets on the fridge were gone. In the master bedroom, the mattress had been stripped. Only the outline of furniture remained in the carpet. "This isn't possible," he said, over and over. "This isn't possible." Lindsay didn't follow. She sat in the middle of the bare living room floor, hands limp on her knees, eyes glassy. "She meant this," she whispered. "She really meant it." Craig stood frozen, as if expecting their life to reappear if he blinked hard enough. The doorbell didn't ring. No knock came. No voice called out. The house was done with them. Outside, Craig stomped toward the mailbox, a last shred of hope flaring. Inside, one envelope. No postage. Just 4 words scrawled in his mother's careful hand. "A storage unit. You've got 30 days. The storage facility was gray and silent, a long row of metal doors under a flat Colorado sky. Craig parked too fast. His tires kicked gravel, startled a bird from the chain-link fence. Unit 108. He punched in the code she'd left. Her birthday, of course. It still worked. The lock clanked open. The door groaned upward. Inside, a wall of boxes. Their boxes, labeled in Sharpie, but not with care. Just kitchen. Bedroom. His crap. A toppled lamp leaned against a dresser drawer. Craig's golf clubs stuck out of a duffel, one bent. Lindsay's designer shoes spilled from a torn shopping bag. It smelled of cardboard and loss. Faint lavender, her scent, clung to the air, as if she'd just left. Lindsay didn't move. She stood at the edge, hands tight around her purse. "She packed everything," she said. Without saying a word, Craig pulled a box forward. "Don't," Lindsay snapped. "We can't live like this. We're not kids." He opened the box anyway. Photos, blankets, an old pair of his sneakers she used to complain about. All here, all intact. She hadn't thrown anything away. Just removed it, like trimming rot. Lindsay stepped inside, knees buckling as she sank onto a rolled rug. Tears streaked her cheeks. "She could have warned us. Said something. Why would she do this?" Craig didn't answer. He didn't know how. He reached for the last box in the corner. It was lighter than it looked. No tape, just folded closed. He opened it. One item inside. A single piece of paper, folded once. Cream stock. No envelope. He pulled it out, unfolded it. In blue ink, steady and plain, because you never asked what I needed. Sex and no name, no signature. Just silence. Craig stared. The words didn't move, didn't bend, didn't soften. Behind him, Lindsay was crying. He didn't go to her. He just stood there, in the dim glow of the storage light, holding the one thing his mother had finally made clear. The new apartment smelled like fresh paint and carpet glue. Too clean, too quiet. But quiet didn't scare her anymore. Marjorie set her small box of essentials on the kitchen counter. Coffee tin, her favorite mug, the old kettle with a loose handle. The place wasn't much. 1 bedroom, a balcony facing east, and a living room just wide enough for her recliner and a shelf of books. Still, it was hers. No one asking if she'd remembered to pay the bill. No one reminding her about cholesterol. No silent judgment when she went for seconds, or forgot to screw the cap back on the milk. That morning, she made coffee for one, and it didn't ache the way it used to. She opened the blinds. The light spilled across the floor, highlighting the soft wrinkles in the rug, the shimmer of dust on the windowsill. She sipped, listening to the hum of a city that didn't know her yet, and for once, that was a comfort. Later, she walked to the coffee shop 3 blocks down, a place with scones in the window, and the smell of cinnamon in the air. The barista had a septum ring and purple streaks in her hair. "What can I get you, ma'am?" Her tone was kind, not sweet, not forced, just human, black, medium, no room. It felt good to say something without needing to explain it. She sat by the window, watching people pass. Mothers pushing strollers, men in suits talking too loud, teenagers laughing like everything was still possible. A woman about her age took the chair across from her. Canvas bag, faded lipstick, a kindness in the eyes. "You new to the neighborhood?" she asked. "Couple days. I'm Helen," the woman said, offering her hand. Marjorie shook it. Marjorie. They sipped in silence for a few minutes. Then Helen asked, soft but curious, "Your children nearby?" Marjorie paused, smiled gently, set her cup down. Not anymore. And that's all right. Helen sipped her coffee, then leaned back with a sigh that carried years. You know, she said, I once took a cruise alone. Bahamas. 5 days. Marjorie raised an eyebrow, half smile tugging. Brave. Helen shrugged. Lonely, at first. But then not so much. She swirled what was left in her cup. My daughter was supposed to come. Bought the tickets for her birthday. She bailed 2 days before. Some work thing. Didn't even call. Just texted. Marjorie didn't speak. She knew that kind of silence. The one that follows a child's excuses. Not cruel, just careless. Which somehow stings more. Helen kept talking, but not like she was venting. Like she was just opening a window. I thought I'd cancel. But I went anyway. Packed the good sundress, got on that ship, told myself I'd pretend she was late. A dry chuckle. By the second night, I was dancing with a man named Walter, who ran a bait shop in Tampa, and couldn't salsa worth a damn. Marjorie laughed. The kind that surprised her, like her ribs remembered how to move. Helen smiled. That trip, I came back different. Not bitter. Just lighter. Marjorie looked out the window. Watching a couple argue quietly on the sidewalk. It reminded her of Craig and Lindsay, always bickering behind grins. I thought freedom came from family, she said, mostly to herself. Turns out, it came after. Helen nodded slowly. Amen to that. They sat in warm silence, 2 women with miles behind them, and a little road still left. You like music? Helen asked. Marjorie tilted her head. Depends. Not fond of anything that thumps. Well, Helen said, there's a jazz trio that plays in the park every Saturday. Nothing fancy, just brass and breeze. You should come. Marjorie hesitated. Old habits warned her to check in, to make sure someone knew her plans. But no one needed to anymore. She smiled. I think I will. They finished their coffee without rush. When they stood to leave, the barista waved. Marjorie waved back. On the walk home, the wind picked up, just enough to lift the edges of her scarf and remind her that she was still here. Not as a mother, not as a burden, just as herself. Dear me, if you're reading this someday, when the hands aren't as steady and the coffee doesn't taste quite right, I want you to remember you made it. You made it through the silence. Through the birthday calls that never came. Through the Sunday mornings that stretched too wide without someone asking what's for lunch. You've lost things. We both know that. You lost a son, not to death, but to a colder thing. The kind of distance that doesn't come with funerals or casseroles. You lost the sound of footsteps on the stairs. The way he used to say, Mom, like it meant something. You lost the feeling that you mattered in someone's daily routine. And goodness, did that loss echo. But you kept some things too. You kept your dignity. Though they tried to barter it for convenience, you kept your voice. Though you went years whispering, so no one would feel uncomfortable with how much you needed. And, most importantly, you kept your name, not burden, not problem, not liability, just Marjorie. You remembered her, the girl who once stitched her own curtains. The young mother who rocked her baby through long, fevered nights. The widow who didn't crumble when the chair beside her stayed empty week after week. If I could sit across from you right now, I wouldn't offer advice. You don't need it. I'd just remind you that surviving is not a small thing. That joy, once it returns, comes quiet, like morning sun through cheap blinds, unannounced, but warm. I saw Craig one last time, not in person, on the camera feed. The one I'd set up before I walked away for good. He was standing in that storage unit, holding the note I left. His face didn't crumple. It didn't rage. He just stopped. I waited for anger to rise in me. Waited for some triumphant feeling to wash in, but it never came. All I felt was a quiet kind of sadness. Not the burning kind. The cool ache of realizing someone never knew you, as well as you hoped. That moment taught me something. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's not erasing what they did or pretending it didn't bruise. Forgiveness is choosing peace over proof. Silence over screaming. Distance over begging to be seen. I didn't forgive Craig for him. I forgave him so I could sit in this small apartment with lavender on the windowsill and breathe without clenching, so I could sip morning coffee and not taste bitterness in the bottom of the cup. That is freedom. And I hope, dear me, you remember that when the ache tries to return. And if someone finds this letter after I'm gone, maybe sitting in a drawer beside an old pair of glasses and a half-used bottle of lavender oil, I hope it finds you at the right time. If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, called too much or not enough, you are not alone. You're not what they labeled you. Not a burden, not a phase-out plan, not an inconvenience waiting for a bed to free up. You're a life, a story, a whole world carved out over decades of giving and holding back and hoping someone would notice. And even if they never did, you're still here, still worthy. If you've ever been discarded, I hope you know. Your story's not over. You can start again, even at 70, even with a broken heart and shaky hands. Start again, and this time make it yours. The park was quiet when Marjorie arrived. Not silent, just settled. Children laughed somewhere near the playground. Leaves fluttered like old postcards in the breeze. And from the center lawn, the first soft notes of jazz floated through the summer air. Helen was already there, waving from a wooden bench beneath the elm. She had a blanket folded across her lap and a Tupperware of lemon cookies she claimed were barely edible. They weren't. Marjorie settled beside her, her bones still stiff in the mornings, but more willing by sunset. She breathed in grass, distant kettle corn, the faint cologne of a man 2 benches over. The trio began to play. Nothing fast, nothing showy. Just 3 men in their 60s and a trumpet that wept like it remembered someone. Marjorie closed her eyes. The music slid down her spine like warm bathwater, not to fix anything, just to remind her she could feel again. Helen leaned closer. Heard anything from the boy? Marjorie shook her head. Would you answer if he called? A pause. I don't know, she said, then smiled small. But I don't sit by the phone anymore. They sat in companionable quiet, watching a toddler try to feed pigeons with a juice-stained napkin. The pigeons were patient, the toddler determined. It was a fair match. The sun slid lower, casting the lawn in amber. A young couple danced barefoot on the grass. The woman laughed, her head thrown back, and Marjorie remembered laughing like that once. Not everything was gone. Some things just waited for room. The band paused. One of the musicians took the mic. This next one's for anyone starting over. At any age. The first notes of Autumn Leaves stirred the branches above them. Marjorie's throat tightened. Not from sorrow, from recognition. She looked around. The scattered chairs, the widower tapping his knee to the beat, the teenager filming on his phone, like this quiet was worth remembering. And she realized something: this was enough. No courtroom. No revenge parade. No apology text she'd read and reread, hoping it felt sincere. Just this, a seat in the evening light. A friend who knew when to speak and when not to. A song that understood. She'd spent too long trying to earn her place in other people's plans. Now, she was making her own, and maybe no one would write books about her. Maybe Craig would tell his side in stories that made her seem unhinged or cold. That was fine. She knew the truth. Ellen did too. That was enough. The music slowed. People clapped, the kind of applause you give when something touched you without asking first. Helen handed her another cookie. You know what I admire about you? You. Marjorie raised an eyebrow. You didn't let the ending happen to you. You made one. Marjorie blinked back something sharp, then laughed. I guess I did. They sat there until the sun dipped behind the trees and the music packed up. Helen offered her arm when they stood. Marjorie took it, not because she needed to, but because she could. As they walked back toward the street, Marjorie glanced up. The first star was out, small, steady. She whispered to herself, like a vow spoken soft. This time, I get to write the ending. And that was the beginning.